On a chilly autumn night in Seoul, the lights from the buildings shone brightly, reflecting off the puddles forming on the city sidewalks. The wind blew fiercely, and the sound of dry leaves being swept across the nearly empty plaza echoed in the air. Jiho, a man in his early 30s, walked lost in thought. Life in the big city had always been bustling, but lately he felt an ever-growing emptiness, as if something was missing, something he couldn't quite identify. As he crossed the plaza, something caught his attention. Near one of the fountains, a man was lying on the curb, his body curled up against the intensifying cold. He seemed invisible to the few passers-by hurrying along. Jiho hesitated for a moment, but for some reason felt compelled to approach. "Hey, are you okay?" Jiho asked, kneeling beside the man. The figure on the ground was thin, his face partially hidden by the hood of a worn-out coat. The man slowly opened his eyes, revealing an empty yet deep gaze that, for an instant, seemed to recognize Jiho. "You," the man murmured, his voice hoarse and weak. "I knew I'd find you here." Jiho drew back slightly, surprised. How could this stranger know him? He tried to remember if he'd seen the man before, but nothing came to mind. Feeling intrigued, Jiho pressed on. "How do you know me? Who are you?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached out, handing Jiho a small, crumpled piece of paper. "You'll understand," he said before closing his eyes again, as if exhausted. Jiho took the paper, and as he unfolded it, a shiver ran down his spine. Written hastily was an address, and below it the words, "It's no coincidence." For reasons unknown to him, Jiho felt the need to learn more about this man and the meaning behind the cryptic message. It felt as if something larger was at play, something he couldn't yet grasp, but that pulled him into a mystery that would change the course of his life. Jiho decided to go to the address written on the paper, a location in an older neighborhood of Seoul, known for its narrow alleyways and traditional hanok houses. The place was a stark contrast to the modern commercial areas he frequented. As he walked along the cobblestone streets, he felt the weight of history and the memories each corner held. The address led him to a small, time-worn building with a dark wooden facade. Jiho hesitated before knocking on the door, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. For a moment, he questioned whether he was making the right decision. Why get involved in the life of a stranger, especially someone who seemed to know more about him than they should? Young Korean man looking scared and shocked in front of an open door of a traditional Korean house. An 87-year-old woman greets him with a toothless, intriguing, and mysterious smile. To his surprise, the door opened, and an elderly woman stood there. Her eyes, though tired, held a glimmer of wisdom. She observed him in silence for a few seconds before smiling. "I've been waiting for you, Jiho," she said in a calm but firm tone. Jiho was taken aback once again. "How do you know my name?" "Come in," the woman replied, making room for him to enter. "You must have many questions, but some answers only reveal themselves in time." The interior of the house was simple, decorated with traditional items and framed old photographs. Jiho noticed that one of the pictures featured a young man who resembled the person he found on the curb. A chill ran down his spine, but before he could ask, the woman pointed to a table where a steaming teapot sat. "The man you met, he's my son, Han. He's not just a stranger. He's been connected to you in ways you don't yet understand." Jiho frowned, feeling a mix of confusion and doubt. "What do you mean by that?" "A long time ago, in another life, perhaps. Your fates crossed," she explained, pouring tea with precise, graceful movements. "Han always believed he would find you again, and that when he did, he would need your help." The traditional elements in the room and the way the woman spoke reminded Jiho of stories his grandparents used to tell about spiritual connections and karmas that spanned generations. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything, but at the same time, he felt that something about the narrative made sense. There was something familiar in the eyes of the man he met, something that now disturbed him. As he drank the tea, Jiho felt a weight on his chest, a sensation that he was connected to something larger than himself. Perhaps this was the opportunity he'd been searching for, the chance to fill the void that had been haunting him for so long. "What do I need to do?" Jiho asked at last, realizing there was no turning back. The elderly woman smiled, a smile that was a mixture of relief and sorrow. "The journey won't be easy, but you'll need to face the mistakes of the past to move forward. Not everything we believe to be a coincidence is by chance." This meeting had been anticipated. Jiho felt the weight of her words. Something within him was on the verge of being revealed, and he knew that, one way or another, this journey would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. In the days that followed, Jiho couldn't stop thinking about Han and the elderly woman who had welcomed him. Something in her words had deeply stirred him. As if a long-forgotten truth was beginning to surface, he decided to return to that house, but when he arrived, he found it empty, as if it had never been inhabited. The door, which had once opened for him, was now locked, and the windows, covered in dust, suggested abandonment. Confused and intrigued, Jiho searched the area for any clues. That's when a man dressed in formal attire with a badge approached him. "Do you know anyone who lived here?" the man asked, giving Jiho an appraising look. I met a man, Han, and a lady. She said she was his mother," Jiho replied, trying to sound convincing. The man frowned. "That's not possible. Han disappeared years ago, and this house has been vacant ever since." Jiho felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "But I was here. They welcomed me. First period. Spoke to her. If you're involved with Han, it's best you come with me," the man said, flashing his badge. "I'm Detective Min. Han is wanted for serious crimes. He's deceived many in the past, and there's suspicion that he's back." Jiho hesitated, but decided to go with the detective. Deep down, he knew this was his only chance to understand what was happening. On the way to the station, Jiho tried to process everything. Why had Han reached out to him, and why had the woman lied or even disappeared? At the station, Min showed Jiho a series of old photos. In many of them, Han appeared with various people, always looking close, almost like an intimate friend. Jiho noticed something odd. Some of the photos seemed to date back decades, yet Han hadn't aged a day. "How is this possible?" Jiho asked, confusion growing. "That's what we're trying to find out. Han shows up in records dating back over 50 years. He gets involved with people, earns their trust, and then disappears, leaving chaos in his wake," Min explained. A chill ran down Jiho's spine. "And what does this have to do with me?" "All signs point to you being his next target, Jiho. He's found you and is trying to involve you in something bigger. We need to figure out why," the detective said, watching him closely. "Tell me, did he mention anything about your past or debts?" Jiho hesitated, recalling the woman's words. "You'll need to face the mistakes of the past." But what past could she be talking about? Jiho had always led a peaceful, normal life, or at least that's what he believed. Determined to find answers, Jiho began investigating on his own. He walked through the alleys and streets of the old neighborhood, searching for any clue that might lead him to Han. During one of his searches, he found a notebook hidden in an alley, Han's name engraved on the cover. Flipping through the pages, Jiho saw notes that looked like diary entries. But something else caught his eye, the names and addresses of various people, including his own. It was as if Han had been mapping out connections, meticulously planning his encounters. Jiho felt a mix of fear and responsibility. He now knew he couldn't simply ignore what was happening. There was something much larger at play, and he was at the center of it. Determined to move forward, Jiho decided to confront Detective Min with the notebook. But when he arrived at the station, he discovered that Min had disappeared. All that remained was a message on Jiho's phone. "Don't trust anyone." Things were becoming increasingly obscure, and Jiho felt trapped in a web of mysteries he barely understood. The man he found on the curb was not just a stranger. He was directly tied to Jiho's fate in a way he still couldn't grasp. More entangled in the mystery than ever, Jiho realized he needed help piecing everything together. He decided to reach out to his childhood friend, Sunwoo, who worked as an investigative journalist. Sunwoo was known for his ability to uncover secrets and connect seemingly unrelated clues. When Jiho explained everything that had happened, Sunwoo was intrigued but also skeptical. "A man who doesn't age. Disappearing houses?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "This sounds like something out of a ghost story." "I know, it sounds crazy, but it all happened," Jiho insisted. "I need to find out who he is and why he's following me." Sunwoo agreed to help, but only under the condition that they proceed carefully. The journalist knew that digging into old mysteries could lead to dangerous consequences. He started looking into old records and found mentions of an organization that, decades ago, conducted secret experiments on individuals. To Jiho, it sounded like something out of a conspiracy film, but he was willing to chase any lead. During their research, Sunwoo found a name: Project Shadows, an initiative that began after the Korean War, aimed at manipulating memories and extending certain individuals' lifespans through genetic experiments. Han, it seemed, was one of the individuals who had undergone the project. Jiho began to realize that Han's involvement in his life wasn't random. Maybe Han wasn't trying to harm him, but rather protect him or warn him about something much bigger. However, crucial answers were still missing. Why was Jiho involved? And what was the connection between the man in the alley and Jiho's own past? As Sunwoo continued his investigation, Jiho started having strange dreams. In one, he found himself in an old hospital with flickering lights and voices echoing down the halls. He looked at his hands and saw blood, but he didn't know where it came from, and in the background there was always a figure, Han, watching him with eyes full of both sadness and urgency. One day, after waking from these dreams, Jiho found a note on his door. "Stop investigating, the past should stay buried." It left him alarmed. Who knew he was digging into Han's story and who was threatening him? Sunwoo, despite his reluctance, agreed to continue the investigation. They started connecting the dots between the people who had been affected by Project Shadows. They discovered that many of them had died under mysterious circumstances, and all were linked by one characteristic. Each possessed an item that seemed to carry significant meaning from the past. For Jiho, it was the notebook he found. For others, it could be jewelry, letters, or photographs. Sunwoo suggested they find other affected individuals, but Jiho hesitated. Detective Min had vanished, and Jiho feared someone might be following in his footsteps. Yet a sense of duty drove him. He knew that if he didn't face this now, it might be too late to find the answers he was seeking. By the end of the week, Sunwoo arranged a meeting with a woman named Mira, who claimed to have information about Han and Project Shadows. They met at a discreet cafe, where Mira revealed that she too had been followed by Han in the past. She recounted an encounter similar to Jiho's, in which Han warned her of an impending threat and urged her to reclaim her forgotten memories. "You feel like you've lost something, don't you?" Mira asked, looking directly at Jiho. "Like parts of your life don't fit together." Jiho, surprised, nodded. "Yes, it's like there's a void, something I can't remember, but that's always there. All of us who went through the project feel that way. They erased us, Jiho, reshaped us. Han is trying to help us, but there are forces that don't want those memories to return," Mira explained. Mira's revelation added another layer to the mystery, and Jiho realized he was more entangled than he had ever imagined. Now he knew there was a hidden past that needed to be uncovered, but he also understood that doing so put him at risk, as well as everyone around him. The pressure on Jiho mounted, and he found himself deeper in a mystery that seemed beyond comprehension. Mira's words echoed in his mind. Han is trying to help us. But he couldn't grasp Han's true intentions, or why his life was being affected by this man who seemed to emerge from the shadows of the past. That night, Jiho was plagued by nightmares that left him exhausted. In one, he was in a dark room surrounded by others, all with expressions of despair and confusion. In the center, a strange machine cast a cold, bluish light over their faces. Han was there once again, but this time he didn't speak. He only watched, and his eyes seemed to plead for help. When Jiho awoke, sweating and gasping for air, he decided he needed to confront Han. He had to know the truth, even if it meant putting himself in danger. So he returned to the place where he first found Han, the plaza, where everything had begun. The darkness of the night enveloped everything around him, but the resolve inside him burned more fiercely than ever. As he walked, his thoughts were a whirlwind. If Han was really trying to help, then why wouldn't he show himself? Jiho felt like he was running out of time, that with each passing minute, something terrible could happen. When he reached the curb where he had first found Han, he noticed a faint light flickering in a nearby alley. Curious and anxious, he decided to investigate. Entering the alley, he found a door slightly ajar. He hesitated, but the urge to uncover the truth pushed him forward. The light came from a room that looked like an improvised lab. Carefully, Jiho peeked through the gap in the door and, to his surprise, saw Han sitting at a table, surrounded by equipment he couldn't recognize. "Jiho!" Han exclaimed, standing up abruptly. His face was paler than before, but his eyes shone with an intensity Jiho had never seen. "What's going on here?" Jiho asked, crossing his arms, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "You need to explain." "I had no choice, Jiho. They're coming after us," Han replied, the anxiety evident in his voice. "The project is still active, and now they know you're involved. You have to remember." "Remember what?" Jiho demanded, fear beginning to morph into anger. "You can't just show up in my life and expect me to know what's going on," Jiho exclaimed. Han took a deep breath, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "You're not just a bystander in this story. Your past is more entwined with mine than you think. You need to understand what happened before it's too late." Then he began to explain. Jiho was one of many individuals who had been part of Project Shadows. Since childhood, he had been a subject of study, involved in experiments that made him a target, a piece in a much larger game. Han, who had escaped, had come back to protect him and help him recover the memories that had been erased. "But why me?" Jiho asked, the words barely a whisper. "I didn't ask for this." "Because you have a gift, Jiho. You can access the memories they tried to erase. You need to remember, and we have to do it together," Han replied, the urgency in his voice growing. Before Jiho could process everything, a loud knock at the door made him jump. He and Han exchanged nervous glances. It could be Detective Min, or someone far more dangerous. Han grabbed Jiho by the arm and pulled him further into the lab. "Quick!" Han whispered. "We have to hide." The door burst open, and a hooded figure stepped in. Jiho barely had time to catch a glimpse of the intruder's face, but the presence radiated a menacing aura. The man scanned the room, and the tension was palpable. Jiho and Han huddled together, not daring to make a sound. The figure seemed to be searching for something, and each second dragged on like an eternity. Just as the man began to move away, Jiho felt a wave of relief. But suddenly, the intruder stopped and looked directly at them. "I know you're here. There's no point in hiding. The truth always comes out," the man said, his voice deep and threatening. Han pulled Jiho closer, his expression resolute. "We can't let him catch us. You need to remember, Jiho. It might be the only way to save us." At that critical moment, Jiho realized his life would never be the same. He was caught in the middle of something that defied understanding, and if he didn't act, everything he loved could be lost forever. The air was thick with tension, like a storm on the brink of breaking. Jiho and Han crouched in the dark corner of the lab, their hearts pounding frantically. The hooded figure, with a piercing gaze, seemed almost able to sense their presence. Jiho, who had felt powerless and confused until now, realized he could no longer hesitate. He had to act. "What do we do?" Jiho whispered, his voice barely audible. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, and he knew every decision counted. "We need to distract him," Han said, his eyes scanning the room rapidly. "There's an exit behind the equipment. When I say so, you run for it." Jiho nodded, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. The reality of the danger was finally sinking in. He wasn't just a victim, he was part of something larger, and now he had to fight to survive. Han took a deep breath and spoke, his voice deliberately loud and clear. "You can try to find us, but you won't succeed. We know more than you think. The hooded figure spun around, surprise quickly turning to anger on his face. I've heard that before. You can't escape what's yours. Han's response sparked a flicker of courage in Jiho. He knew he had to confront his fear and remember what was really happening. With each word from Han, something inside him began to awaken. Long-forgotten memories started stirring at the surface of his mind, bringing flashes of a dark past. "What do you know about us?" Jiho dared to ask, his voice now steadier. He needed to understand the extent of the threat they were facing. "What I know is that you're destined to become a crucial piece in this game, and you won't escape," the hooded man said, stepping forward, his voice relentless. Han seized the moment to pull Jiho toward the exit. "Now!" he ordered, and they bolted for the back path. Jiho's heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. As they ran, flashes of memories surged through Jiho's mind, past lives mixed in a chaotic whirlwind, images of labs, smiling faces, and then chaos and panic. It was like a puzzle slowly piecing itself together, revealing a dark truth. He needed to remember, and fast. As they burst out of the lab, the night air wrapped around them like a cloak. The tension was suffocating, and Jiho realized they were still far from safe. They needed to find shelter and figure out what was really going on. Han led Jiho into a narrow alley, away from the prying eyes of people in the plaza. They pressed against the wall, trying to catch their breath. Jiho looked at Han, worry etched across his face. "What do we do now?" "They'll find us." "We need to find allies," Han replied, determination glinting in his eyes. "There are others who can help us, people who are also affected by Project Shadows. But how will I know who to trust?" Jiho felt his anxiety shifting into desperation. The world around him felt like a trap, and the only certainty he had was uncertainty. "You need to trust your intuition," Han said, gripping Jiho's shoulders, his expression serious. "There is more to you, a strength you don't recognize yet. But you need to believe." Han's words echoed in Jiho's mind. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he felt a newfound determination. He couldn't keep running. It was time to face whatever was coming. As they moved toward a meeting point Han had mentioned, Jiho began to recall more details from his past. Memories of his days in the lab started to clear up. He remembered a group of people, all fighting against the same system, trying to control them. Together, they were stronger. Approaching the designated spot, Jiho felt a mix of hope and apprehension. What would they find? Would they be allies or another trap? When they reached a small hidden cafe, Han paused and looked at Jiho. "They're waiting for us. If we're accepted, it will be the first step toward uncovering the truth and maybe helping you recover your memories," Han said, his voice heavy with anticipation. With one last look at the uncertain future, Jiho nodded. He couldn't be paralyzed by fear any longer. It was time to act, to discover what it meant to be part of Project Shadows, and above all, who he really was. Jiho and Han stepped into the cafe, where the warm light of the lamps created a welcoming atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the tension of the moment. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods surrounded them, but Jiho's nerves overshadowed the comforting sensation. A group of people sat at a table in the back, each appearing as anxious as they were. A woman with short hair and a piercing gaze stood up as soon as she saw them. "You must be Jiho and Han. I'm Minji, and we've been waiting for you," she said, gesturing for them to join the group. Jiho felt a mix of relief and apprehension. How could he trust these people? But Han's determined presence beside him was reassuring. "We need to talk," Han began, and everyone at the table nodded, their expressions serious. Minji started explaining the situation. "We're all involved in Project Shadows, in different ways. Some of us managed to escape, others are still fighting. We know you have valuable information, Jiho, and we need you to remember what happened." As Minji spoke, Jiho felt memories beginning to flow, images of a dark lab, people screaming, and an experiment gone wrong. The feeling of loss and pain filled his heart, but there was also a spark of strength. "What do you remember?" Han asked, his voice full of expectation. Jiho hesitated, but knew he couldn't hold back anymore. I remember something being injected into me. There were other people. I wasn't alone. It was like we were guinea pigs, part of a larger experiment. His voice trembled as the memories surged back. And there was a woman, a scientist. She tried to help us, but then everything went blurry. That woman could be the key to finding out more, Minji said, leaning forward. If we can find her, maybe we can understand what really happened and how you fit into this. The idea of having a clear objective gave Jiho a new sense of purpose. He looked around, taking in the expressions on the others' faces. They were all willing to fight, each carrying their own scars, but united by a greater cause. So, what do we do now? Jiho asked, his heart beating more steadily, but still anxious. We need to prepare. The intruder we saw before is part of a larger organization. They won't stop until they get what they want, Han said, his voice growing more resolute. We have to hide, but we also need to grow stronger. We'll train together and at the same time try to uncover more about what happened. Agreeing to the plan, Jiho felt for the first time that he was surrounded by people who truly understood him. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters. He committed himself to joining them, training and reclaiming what was left of his life before the experiment. And over time, he started to feel stronger. The weeks that followed were intense. Jiho joined a group that trained in both self-defense and infiltration strategies. He dedicated himself to learning everything he could, determined not to be a victim anymore. Each day brought new challenges, but also new discoveries. He realized he had abilities he never knew he possessed, from surprising agility to the ability to stay calm under high-stress situations. On the other hand, the memories kept resurfacing, and Jiho embraced them. He remembered his true name before he was called Jiho, moments from his past life that now made sense. Each piece of memory he recovered brought a new sense of identity. During one of the training sessions, Jiho faced a situation where he had to step up and lead a simulated escape exercise. Commanding the group, he felt powerful. It was an impressive transformation, from a lost and confused man to a leader who inspired confidence in others. "You're doing great, Jiho," Han said, a proud smile on his face after the session. "Your confidence is growing. You're finding your true self." Jiho felt a wave of gratitude. He wasn't just a survivor, he was becoming a fighter. He was rising from a place of pain and uncertainty, ready to face whatever awaited him. But even as he grew stronger, Jiho couldn't ignore the darkness looming over them. He knew the organization behind Project Shadows was lurking, ready to strike at any moment. The pressure was palpable, but instead of fearing it, he was starting to feel prepared. Still, a part of him wondered, when would this fight end? What else was coming? With training underway and Jiho's group becoming more united, the tension in the air was undeniable. They had discovered that the organization behind Project Shadows was planning a large-scale operation, and time was running out. Their next move could determine the future of everyone involved. Minji gathered the group in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location chosen for its discretion and safety. The concrete walls and dirt floor provided the perfect environment for discussions and planning. Jiho looked around, taking in the determined faces of his companions. There was an intensity in the air, and he could feel the weight of the responsibility resting on his shoulders. "Everyone, we need to be quick and strategic," Minji began, her firm voice echoing through the space. "We have information that the organization is about to conduct an operation at an old research facility. This could be our chance to expose what they're doing and rescue others who are still trapped." Jiho felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. What they were about to do wasn't just dangerous, it could change everything. He glanced at Han, who stood by his side, radiating a confidence that inspired courage in him. "We need a detailed plan. We can't act impulsively," Jiho interjected, his voice rising slightly. "We need to know how many guards are there, the shift schedules, and if there's any way to access the facility undetected." The others started discussing strategies and suggestions. A man named June, who had a background in technology, raised his hand. I can hack the security systems. If we can disable the cameras and alarms, we'll have a better chance of getting in and out unnoticed. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and Jiho felt a new surge of hope. If each of them used their unique skills, they might just succeed. The discussions continued, and gradually a plan began to take shape. Everyone split into groups, those who would create a diversion, those who would infiltrate, and those who would stand by to provide support. Jiho and Han were assigned to the infiltration team, which only fueled Jiho's determination. The night before the mission, as they prepared, Jiho had a moment of reflection. He stepped away from the group and sat in a dark corner, taking deep breaths. The flashes of memories he had regained were a mixture of pain and hope. He thought of the woman who had tried to help him in the lab, remembering the look in her eyes as he struggled with his new reality. He needed to find her, to understand what had happened, and most of all, to get revenge for everything the organization had done. Han approached and sat beside him, concern on his face. "Hey, are you okay? You seem distant." Jiho turned to Han, seeking comfort in his friend's presence. "I'm thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. This could go very wrong." "Yeah, but it could also go very right. We're fighting for something bigger. And besides, we're not alone," Han replied, encouraging Jiho to open up. "Remember who you were before. You're stronger now, and no matter what happens, you're not alone anymore." Those words resonated in Jiho's mind. The transformation he had experienced in the past weeks was real. He had gone from being broken and confused to being a leader who cared for those around him. And he wasn't going to back down now. That same night, the group went over the plan multiple times, each member absorbing their responsibilities. They tested equipment and mentally prepared for what was to come. The energy in the air was electrically charged, a mix of nerves and determination. Dawn arrived with a blend of anxiety and anticipation. Jiho dressed in silence, feeling that what he was about to do would change his life forever. He wasn't sure what he would find at the facility, but he knew he had to try. As they gathered to leave, Jiho looked at all the faces, each carrying their own burdens. They stood together, ready to face whatever was coming, and with one final encouraging glance at Han, Jiho stepped forward, determined not to turn back. The air was cold and heavy as Jiho and the group approached the research facility. The tall walls and barbed wire surrounding the site seemed impenetrable, but together they had meticulously planned every step to bypass the security barriers. Adrenaline coursed through Jiho's veins as he crept toward the main gate, where the distraction team was poised to act. With a prearranged signal, the distraction team set their plan in motion. Loud explosions echoed in the distance, creating a cover of chaos. The guards started running, diverting their attention to the source of the commotion. Jiho felt a surge of courage and turned to Han. "Let's go," he whispered, and they both moved quickly to the gate, where June had already managed to disable the security cameras. They entered the facility, the sounds of distant sirens filling the air. Jiho and Han navigated dimly lit corridors, their movements silent and the tension palpable. The walls were cold and grey, reflecting the starkness of what they were about to face. "We need to find the main lab," Han said, glancing at the map June had provided. Jiho nodded, his heart racing as they approached the place where he believed the woman from his visions would be. The hope of finding her pushed him forward. They advanced carefully, slipping past more distracted guards. The team's preparation and training were paying off. However, as they turned a corner, they found a group of soldiers heading their way. Jiho froze, a wave of panic surging through him. Han, sensing the danger, pulled Jiho into a dark corner. They stood still, listening as the guards' footsteps drew closer. "We need to distract them," Han said, his voice low and tense. Jiho nodded, thinking quickly. "June must have left some gear we can use. We need to create noise away from here." They moved swiftly, and Jiho spotted a small device June had left in a corner. It was a sound generator. He activated it, and a loud noise echoed from the other end of the corridor. The guards immediately turned and ran toward the sound, giving Jiho and Han the chance they needed. They pressed on, more determined than ever. The corridor seemed endless, each step laden with a mix of hope and fear. Finally, they reached the door to the main lab. Jiho placed his hand on the doorknob, anxiety building. He glanced at Han, who nodded, and then turned the knob, pushing the door open. The sight inside made Jiho's heart race. The lab was a large room filled with strange equipment and vials of unknown substances. In the center, on an operating table, was the woman he had seen in his memories. She looked pale and weak, but she was breathing. Shock washed over him. "Jiho!" Han exclaimed, his voice full of relief. "We need to help her!" Jiho rushed to the table, his heart pounding. He leaned over her, gently touching her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She opened her eyes slowly, recognizing Jiho. You came to save me?" Her voice was weak, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Yes, we're getting you out of here," Jiho said, the relief washing over him. But before they could move, the lab door burst open. A group of soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised and ready. The leader, a man with a scar across his face, smiled cruelly. Well, look who we have here, the Lost One and his little team of heroes." He laughed, and the others followed suit. Jiho felt panic rise in his chest. They were trapped, and the chance of escaping was slipping away. "Don't let them get out!" the leader shouted. Gunfire erupted instantly. Jiho ducked, pulling the woman close as Han took cover behind a table, firing back. Chaos erupted in the lab, the sound of gunfire pounding in their ears. Jiho and Han moved, trying to dodge the bullets. Jiho felt fear gripping him, but the determination to protect the woman beside him was stronger. He scanned the room, searching for an exit. "We need to get out of here," Han shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Jiho had an idea. He remembered one of the devices June had left behind, a small explosive that could create a diversion. "Han!" Jiho called, pointing to the device. "Let's use it." Han nodded, and Jiho threw the explosive toward the door. The blast was intense, forcing the soldiers to retreat and giving Jiho and Han the chance to pull the woman and run toward a side exit. The path was fraught with danger, but their courage drove them. Jiho knew failure was not an option now. What was at stake was more than their lives. It was the freedom of everyone who had been imprisoned. Their race down the corridor echoed with adrenaline and determination. Jiho, Han, and the woman moved swiftly, dodging the bullets that still whizzed around them. The blast had caused confusion, and the soldiers were momentarily disoriented. This was the chance they needed. "Almost there!" Han shouted, pulling Jiho and the woman by the hand. The exit was in sight, a rusted metal gate that led outside. Jiho felt a mix of hope and fear. What awaited them on the other side? As they pushed through the door, they were met by the biting cold of the night. The sky was shrouded in dark clouds, and the moon seemed like a silent witness to what they had just faced. But there was no time to catch their breath. The sound of sirens and shouted orders echoed through the facility, and Jiho knew their escape was far from certain. "We have to split up," Han suggested, panting. "It'll make it harder for them to find us." Jiho hesitated but nodded. The woman's safety was the priority. "You're right. Let's meet at the park, by the big tree," Jiho said, already recalling his childhood when he used to play there. Before they parted, Jiho held the woman's hand, looking into her eyes. "You'll be okay. We'll find a way out of this." She nodded, determination in her eyes, but Jiho could see the fragility behind her bravery. He let go of her hand, casting one last look before turning and running in the opposite direction from Han and the woman. The shadows enveloped him as Jiho moved with agility, using the skills he had acquired throughout his life. He knew the facility wasn't far from the city, and the darkness was his ally. The sound of guards searching for them still echoed, but he was determined not to let fear paralyze him. As he ran, he remembered the first time he saw the woman. The connection he felt immediately seemed even stronger now. He needed to find her again, protect her, and help her escape from those people's grasp. No matter what, he would do everything for her. Finally, as he approached the park, hope surged within him. The big tree stood tall, its leaves whispering in the wind. He stepped into the park, his heart pounding as he anxiously scanned the area. Where were Han and the woman? Minutes passed, and the tension threatened to overwhelm him. He sat on a bench, thinking about how much his life had changed since meeting her. And then, out of the darkness, a figure appeared. It was Han, breathing heavily, but with a relieved expression. "She's safe," Han said, a broad smile on his face. "I got her to a secure place. The plan worked." The wave of relief that washed over Jiho was indescribable. "Where is she?" he asked eagerly. "On her way to the city. June's already there to make sure she's protected," Han replied as they sat on the bench. Jiho closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The fight was far from over, but the connection he had with the woman and the friendship he had formed with Han made him realize that there was hope. The world still had light, even in the deepest shadows. As they looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the sky, Jiho knew life would never be the same. He had found not just a mission, but a purpose. The fight against oppression was only beginning, and he was no longer alone. Months passed since that fateful night. Jiho and Han became prominent figures in the resistance, helping others escape the grip of oppression. The woman he had met in the alley became an ally, her courage inspiring many. One sunny morning, Jiho and the woman met again under the tree in the park. She smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The world was still full of challenges, but together they were ready to face them. With a gentle breeze blowing around them, Jiho realized that despite the scars of the past, a bright future awaited them. Now, Jiho's story, along with Han's and the woman's beneath the tree, intertwined with the stories of many who fought for freedom and justice. Every encounter, every challenge overcome, reminded them of the power of solidarity and hope. If this story moved you, share your reflections and help spread the message that even in the darkest shadows, there is always a light to be found. Let's be the change we wish to see in the world.